Welcome to Far East Wargaming. I'm Richard, bringing you another Heresy Thursday. This week, unfortunately, we don't have any guests on the podcast, but we're looking at the latest announcement by Games Workshop on their Warhammer community about the new game system for the Horus Heresy. Now, this came out over the weekend, and throughout the week, there have been other releases and other updates, so we will go through this. We didn't want to do an immediate reaction because we wanted time to view the pros and cons of what's happening with the Horus Heresy and Games Workshop. So what did they announce? And I think everybody's well aware. It's been in the pipeline for a while and it's been in the rumor mill. But they announced a new epic scale, so basically a new version of epic for Warhammer, specifically in the Horus Heresy. And they're calling it Legion Imperialis. So this is following along from the naming methodologies for Aeronautica Imperialis, and it's a reduced scale for large warfare. Now I'll say for myself, I'm actually pretty excited by this release, or the fact that they're announcing epic. Because though it's not directly related to what we do mainly on the channel, so Age of Darkness, Warhammer Horus Heresy, it's still something that is related to what we like. The lore can be adapted to this, and the models, from what we've seen so far, look quite appealing. Now, the elephant in the room is that those who had Epic way back when, this is in a different scale, so it's not usable or legally by Games Workshop when they release this. Now, I don't think anybody's going to have any issue with you using your old Epic in this new Legion Imperialis rule set, but there are some significant changes. So if we look at what they've announced for the box, it's quite an interesting box set. Now, we've got the information on the units available, but sadly nothing to do with pricing. And there's been lots of rumors about what this would potentially cost. But I think it's just safer to wait until the box set is released to really talk about pricing there. Because this is going to be key for this game system. It's another boxed game system that, if it's too expensive to play, is going to sit very firmly in the niche area. Now, the saving grace, in one view, is that the Adeptus Titanicus Titans can be used in this. Though there's a significant change in the sense that the bases are different. During the preview, they did announce that the Adeptus Titanicus bases, or the bases for all of these because of the reduced scale, would be different from ones they normally use for the rest of their model range. They were stating that they wanted thinner bases because the models are smaller. And as opposed to Epic, where they were on square bases, GW is really firmly set in their round base methodology here. And I guess it's easier for moving large infantry swarms that these units is meant to represent. So if we have a look at what's in the box itself, there are, as Games Workshop already does for box releases, two forces here. A Space Marine force and a Solar Auxiliary force, as well as a small detachment of Titans, so two Warhounds there. If we start with the Warhounds, these are looking like the base model of the plastic Warhounds available in Adeptus Titanicus. But the key thing is they've got a new weapons loadout. So for those who do play Adeptus Titanicus, I think this can be a good thing for you guys as well. That is, if the game system stays in play. One of the things, the major announcements they made here is that other platform models, such as Titanicus, but also Aeronautica Imperialis, can be used in this game system. And we'll go on to Aeronautica Imperialis a bit and its potential future or lack thereof later in the podcast. But if we look at what's in the box set, we have sets of infantry, we have the vehicles from both sides, contemptors, and then the things we don't actually have in 30k, which are command squads and assault marines in plastic. I find it quite ironic that they've announced and shown us models for command squads and assault marines for this new Legions Imperialis before they've actually done anything for the Age of Darkness. And honestly, that's quite disappointing from my seat as an Age of Darkness player. But honestly, not entirely surprising from Games Workshop here. So they have given us some very lovely models. From the look of it here, you can see this is the command squad. 5 men on a base. Everybody in the infantry is sitting on a tactical rock. And I'm 100% sure that's just because the scale, you need enough to be able to glue them on there, and the feet would be way too tiny to do so reliably there. But if you look at their poses, I think this is something that was said on other channels reviewing this. Since we've not really seen a full 3D version or live version, it's quite likely that these might be the poses we actually get with the command squads. The one thing I'll find about everything that they've released here for the infantry, these are scaled down versions, as you can understand, of what they've released in plastic. So we have plastic beakies, so the units are beakies, none of the other marks. And in Epic, in the old Epic, they were in beakies as well, so it's not too far away. But I've got a feeling all they really do here is they scale down their STL or their CAD files for what they've done in plastic, or resin in some cases, and then use these as the model here. Now, everybody's talking about the detail you're getting, or at least the presenters on the preview were talking about the detail you're getting on these. The question really is, how much detail can you paint into a small model like this? They are quarter scale of a Marine, so I think that makes them 6 to 8 millimeters in height. And if we look at how these were painted by the Heavy Metal team, even painters of that caliber aren't really able to bring out everything in such a small scale. On the bright side, that means it's easier for us as amateurs to be able to paint something like this and have it passable. You have to bear in mind this is supposed to be more hoardy than individual look up close. So we are taking a microscope to things that are very small here, and we have to be fair about that. Another thing they showed us was the jump packs. And again, since we don't have jump packs in Age of Darkness, this is going to be quite telling for what they'll look like, the plastic versions, when they release them later this year or early next year for Age of Darkness here. They're still, again, once in beakies. They're not using any of the Heresy era jump packs. So we're getting further and further away from the traditions of the Horus Heresy and the older marks of armor in favor of these new Mark 6, the simpler to paint one. But I won't go on any more about that. We've had enough discussions between myself, Jason, the other people who have joined us on the podcast about the pros and cons of the Mark 6 armor. The tactical support squad here. Honestly, I can't complain too much about the majority of the models that they've given here. I think for an epic scale, these are going to be quite fun. And I will say this, we at Far East Wargaming will be taking on this system, whether it's fully in plastic or what I've got a feeling a lot of the community will do who do have access to third-party resources such as 3D printing. That will come into a large play, especially because the scale of this requires less detail that our larger models in Age of Darkness do. We have 2 types of Terminators available here. The standard Power Fist version, and then some with Thunderhammers as well. One thing that they're still lacking in the Terminators is the base loadout for a Terminator squad, which is Power Swords. This is something we've been lacking in Age of Darkness size, and it's still lacking here. Running bare bones Terminator squads with Power Swords just isn't a viable option, because it's so hard to get the weaponry without third-party 3D printing or cannibalizing various box sets to have the arms available. Now, Epic is also about the tanks, and I think some would say it's mainly about the tanks, being able to field hordes of tanks. They've given us 2 Contemptors, which are scaled-down versions of the plastic Contemptors we've had in Age of Darkness for a while now. Nice to see. I think they'll be fun on the field. I think also, just the nature of the game, they're going to be less of a threat than they are in Age of Darkness, and the prevalence of them on the board having at least 2 in most forces, just because they're so hard to kill and they're so deadly in this new game system and meta. But if we look at the cool things, I'm a big fan of Sicarans. I loved the fact that they brought them out in plastic for us in Age of Darkness, and I think they're still a very cool model, and seeing them in mini scale, and the thought of being able to field a wide array, so squadrons and squadrons of these, really has my heart tingling as a Heresy player, because it's unfeasible to do that in Age of Darkness, points-wise, but also just mechanically. They're quite expensive models, even though they are in plastic. They're definitely affordable compared to the resin we used to have, and they're definitely a lot easier to assemble and magnetize or just modify the turrets. But we've got both here in the preview, the standard Sicaran, and then I think it's the Omega class of Sicaran there. Of course, for the rest, we have the standard Deimos patterned Predator chassis, again with the various things. I personally am not a huge fan of how we've suddenly got twin-linked las cannons on Predators. Yes, on the plus side, it makes Predators a bit more deadly than just having autocannons. And speaking of the autocannons, I don't think the autocannon on this preview model was assembled correctly, because it does look a bit droopy in that respect. It doesn't seem to be pointing as fervently forward as I believe it should there. Now moving on to the Solar Auxilia part of things. Now this is the human element of the box set, so I like to see that, because it's rarer you see these on the table in Age of Darkness, because they're so expensive because everything is in resin. And here we have plastic mini versions. But as you scale everything down in mini, these really don't look like humans per se. They look like smaller versions of Marines in a different mark of armor. It's very hard to tell actually that they are supposed to be humans in metallic armor here. I'm not a fan of the model, I'm going to be honest with you there. I think it's cool that we have them, but I think they've chosen to scale down a model that looks great in normal scale because of the details that's available on it. But when you're making it this small, you're sacrificing so many of those details, so it's blending into a bit of a mush here. And I don't honestly think that the paint job was did them justice either here. So they've got the standard squads with las carbines. They have their command squads as well, so we're getting even spreads here. Then they have some of their elite squads, and then some of their more larger friends in terms of their monstrous creature side of things. So the equivalent, I think, to our contemptors for the Space Marines. Again, these are all cool models, cool to have. I think you'll find that for Age of Darkness, though, the box set is going to be mainly focused, or people will mainly focus on the Space Marine side of things. I think this is, especially if you're splitting this amongst people, I think those looking to run a Solar Auxiliary force will be pleasantly surprised how many people are willing to offload that portion of the box set to them to be able to build something like this. Now we've also got their mechanized side of things, so the older version of Sentinels here. Again, I think they are a very cool model. I think they've done justice to the mechanical side of things for most of this range for Legions Imperialis. The tanks themselves look very cool. I'm a big fan of tanks in general, and especially for militia, or in this case Solar Auxilia. Running a tank-heavy force, I think, is probably the way to go for this. So they've shown us 4 different types of their tanks. I'm sure there'll be more coming in the future weeks and months, or more previewed there. But honestly, all good things, and I'm really a big fan of what's happening here. Now we move on to the Titans. Now, I like them. They're basically the Adeptus Titanicus model, and I don't think anybody really has anything negative to say about the plastic versions of Adeptus Titanicus. They provide a lot of room for customization, a lot of space for if you wish to freehand. Transfers are very easy to do, though transfers are quite hard to find in some cases for Adeptus Titanicus. But it's honestly a modeler's dream in here. It's a Titan in a smaller scale with still all the details. We've done some amazing things with plastic, and I have to give credit where credit is due for Games Workshop. Their Titan range in the Adeptus Titanicus is superb. Now we can see here, this is the newer base, so it's clearly a thinner base than you normally get in Adeptus Titanicus. It also seems to have some details in it, which is more akin to what we are used to from resin bases with the details here, but GW has released plastic textured bases in the past, and I think it coming with the set does add a nice level of, I don't know, premium to it. Now, of course, there are 2 Warhound Titans previewed here. There's nothing going to stop you from using anything else from the Adeptus Titanicus range, once the rules come out. Again, we'll see how that really equivalates to it. But again, it's another lovely model. It's nice to see new weapons loadouts for these. And so there's a close combat variant and there's a more artillery variant for the Warhounds here. Now, if we look at the rulebook, it's following very much along the lines of all the other black books that have been released by Games Workshop in this latest iteration of Warhammer the Horus Heresy, be that Age of Darkness or now here Legions Imperialis. I think you'll find we're going to get 50% lore and pictures and about 50% of the rules, which is something I do like. I really just hope that this rule set has been fleshed out to properly play, because I think, as we've talked about in other rule sets or other versions of our rule sets, I wish that Games Workshop would move the rule sets to PDF and be easily changeable as opposed to setting them in stone in books. And for us who are lore aficionados who love the lore, we're more than happy to buy lore dedicated black books and even pay a premium for these things. So look, if Games Workshop is listening, we've said this once, we'll probably continue saying this into the future. But the Horus Heresy people in general, especially the older generation of Horus Heresy from 1.0, from the beginning till the end of 1.0 there, they're all putting a premium on lore and the fidelity to that lore. The black books from the previous edition of Heresy 1.0 are still being sold. You can find them on resale sites, and they're being sold for crazy amounts. And that should really tell you the value we put on quality products and quality rule sets, but just the lore that was in them, the content that was in them. They're amazing books to read. And I personally try and read as much as I can. I've not read all of them. Sadly, I haven't got access to all of them. But I know my partner on this channel, Jason, he has several sets of the full collection of books, and he's read them from cover to cover, probably more than once. Now, throughout the week, they've also released 2 new articles, and the first one they released was the 10 things you need to know about Warhammer the Horus Heresy Legions Imperialis. So basically, they've gone in and gone more to what they were talking about in the preview. They were talking about the epic scale, and so they were talking about the ability to use your Adeptus Titanicus and your Aeronautica Imperialis in this game system. I won't lie, I am very curious how they're going to adapt Aeronautica Imperialis into this, because though the scale is said to be the same, I have some of these models as well, and they are vastly different in size, in my opinion, but also just in practical use of these. Don't forget the planes, especially the Xiphons and such. We see them normally a lot higher up. They don't take such a big part in Age of Darkness anymore, just because of the vulnerability of flyers, so it would be nice to see them in small scale. But we're going from a game system where it was all flyers to now integrating flyers once again into a larger system. Again, seeing the rules will really tell us how that is, but it's also giving us some strange indications of the future or the lack thereof of Aeronautica Imperialis. They've also previewed some of the new terrain you're going to be able to use in Epic. Now, you have to bear in mind that since the scale is different, the standard terrain you have for the rest of your game systems isn't applicable to this one here, just because everything will be outscaled considerably. It's using a new version of what they probably use for the Adeptus Titanicus here. So previewing of new scenery, again, this is a big moneymaker for GW, and I'll say one thing about GW scenery. They make some great scenery. Whether it's affordable or not is a completely different question, and I'm sure there will be third-party counterparts. We at Far East Wargaming are starting to do some tutorials on how to build some terrain, and I'm sure in the future, building Adeptus Titanicus terrain, or sorry, Legion Imperialis terrain, will be part of that as well. The final article they released, and that was on the 4th of July, so happy Independence Day to those Americans who are celebrating it, but it's just about the scale. So they talked about the relative scale to the new models, and they gave us some previews here. I'm not going to delve too far into it. They're saying the entire base to top is about 4 times a Marine's height. So not including the base, let's say 3.5. It's giving us an indication 6 to 8 millimeters more or less than this. The Contemptor Dreadnoughts are also considerably smaller. The tanks, as you've been given. It's a nice thing to show. Again, not really any point we knew they were smaller. If you gave us one comparison, we could figure out the rest. Nice for you to do, but we would have preferred some more, well, I would have preferred some more consistent announcement into this, maybe a bit more about the rules, if they've even finalized them. And that really is a key question. Have they finalized the rules for this? Well, that sums up really everything that was announced over the last week for Legion Imperialis. Now, the one thing I want to go into is how this latest announcement affects the rest of the systems, mainly Aeronautica and Adeptus Titanicus. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is the terrain. So they did announce new terrain, but this is the Games Workshop website, and the Adeptus Titanicus terrain is just no longer available. So whether this means they are pulling the line for Adeptus Titanicus, and this may be giving an indication that that might be the case, because these were Adeptus Titanicus, or they're repurposing this now all terrain for this scale, this new epic scale that they're calling it here, is going to be used purely for, or marketed purely under Legion Imperialis here. Only time will tell, but it not being available online means that when it's probably released, it'll probably have a price increase, as is the way Games Workshop does everything, and hopefully a new range of models. On the bright side, Forgeworld still has their full range of resin titans. Now, these are the more expensive variants for Adeptus Titanicus, but they're still all here. The Warlord Psi Titan there has always been in and out of stock, no longer available, maybe because they're retooling this into plastic, which might be a really cool thing to see. We can only hope. And the rest temporarily out of stock, or just in general not available, is something that comes in and out of stock at Games Workshop, especially for Forgeworld. But the big elephant in the room comes down to Aeronautica Imperialis. Now, from its first release, where it was about all of the different races fighting together, so there was the Imperial Navy, there was the Orcs, there was the Tau, there was the Eldar, Space Marines, of course. They released a update to that, which was a Horus Heresy version of it as well, that was purely all the Imperial forces fighting. But now, if we go into their website here, everything that isn't Space Marines or Imperial is on last chance to buy. Now, this to me isn't a great omen for the longevity of this system, especially with the announcement they're porting over the usability of these models to the Horus Heresy, and they're keeping all of the ones that they're porting over available to buy. So last chance to buy really is an indicator from Games Workshop that this system is no longer going to be available, and only the Aeronautica Imperialis version of the Horus Heresy is going to be the way to play this, or now Legion Imperialis and playing it in the epic scale here, which is sad to see, because even though I personally don't play Aeronautica Imperialis, it was something I was looking at doing, and them discontinuing the line is quite sad there. The same in the Forgeworld store. So the Forgeworld had some of the Xenos races as well, and every single one of the Xenos races is also on last chance to buy. Now, Games Workshop and Forgeworld are closely linked. They're actually one company now, I believe, and so if one does something, the other will follow suit. So this is another indication that Xenos races in this scale are something that Games Workshop really isn't going to support anymore moving on to the future. And I do find that slightly sad, especially for those who already have it. But then again, last chance to buy. If you really do want to keep playing Aeronautica Imperialis, I really honestly suggest you pick up as much of it as possible for the Xenos races as you can now, because these are going to become a bit like Battlefleet Gothic became, and be relics that are going to be extremely expensive to buy in the future if you do want to get into this game system. So look, I want to round off this Heresy Thursday from us at East Wargaming. It's not all doom and gloom, to be honest. I will say I'm very, very excited by this new system. It's going to be awesome to play. It's going to be awesome to see. I hope it's an affordable system that they're going to release, because more people playing it would be great. Things on this scale, it's I think this is what we wanted to see for a while. People love doing this kind of thing, and the models do look fantastic. So we will be doing this on the East Wargaming channel when it does release. I'm very happy with the announcement. I'm very happy with the models that they've previewed. We poke fun at Games Workshop on a regular basis here. They've done some good things and some bad things in this, and I think that's just in general with all their releases. They do some good and some bad. I think here the good outweighs the amount of bad. I do find it funny the way we're seeing plastic models for things that we don't actually have in Age of Darkness, but that's the way with Games Workshop. I think where everything's in the pipeline for Age of Darkness, so we just have to be patient. Patience is wearing thin, I will say this, but it will come. It has been announced. We still haven't seen the announcements of the key things we want, but hopefully we can see that in the coming months. They did say that their Heresy Thursday previews would come back later in the year. It is later in the year, and they've already started doing some of these previews for the Horus Heresy. Legions Imperialis this time. We can hope it's Age of Darkness next time, but only time will tell, and we'll see in the coming weeks now. But from me at East Wargaming, thank you for tuning in if you've stayed. I hope this was informative. If you agree or disagree, please feel free to leave something in the comments. We're happy to have this discussion. It's my opinion this week on all of this, and opinions may vary. But thanks for tuning in, and from me, Richard, I will see you next time.